Well, hi, it's Jim Owens. It's Sunday, September the 17th, a little later in the evening tonight than normal, and wanted to share a few thoughts with you this week about communication and a few things that have happened to me over the last week or two that I thought would be useful to you and good reminders for me. And keep in mind that anything I share here, I share as what one friend of mine once called one beggar showing another beggar where to find bread. Certainly, the things that I talk about, I'm not perfect at and wouldn't claim to be, but they are things that I try to be mindful of. And last week was interesting. A few interesting things happened. One was amusing. I spent some time listening to Lewis Black, the comedian. He was sharing a story about what it's like to be 60 years old and try to communicate with his peers. He had told a story about going to see a movie in which he related that back to his peer group, his 60-year-old friends. And he said, I went to see that movie that you told me about, that movie about the guy. And his friend said, what movie? And he said, the movie about the guy and the thing. And he couldn't remember the name of the movie, and he couldn't remember the name of the guy, and he couldn't remember the name of the thing. But everyone kind of knew what he was talking about. And in that case, it was a fairly innocuous situation where knowing all the facts wasn't necessary. And Black was poking fun at himself and what it was like to be 60 years old and be unable to remember the names of certain people or things or experiences and what toll aging had taken on him. But that said, I thought it was an interesting paradigm to think about the fact that when we communicate with other people, sometimes we have failed to communicate what we intend, and we have oftentimes heard what we weren't supposed to hear, so to speak. There's a reference to a ancient, I believe he's a Hindu philosopher, Atisha, perhaps he was a Buddhist. He said to not misjudge was his little adage, a pithy saying that he had. And I think a lot of times we misjudge based on limited amounts of information that we have. We misjudge facts and intentions, and I think those are things that are important to be mindful of when we try to communicate with other people. It's one thing in business, it's another thing in personal relationships, although I think all business is personal in many, many ways. If people don't feel like they are respected, if they don't feel like they are heard, then they are less likely to want to join with you in some effort to accomplish a shared goal. The other thing that happened, which really was business related, was I was engaged in a conversation not long ago about a particular transaction and negotiation that was going on, and the two parties that were involved had swapped emails repeatedly about a given topic. And much to their frustration and to a third party who was involved in it, wasn't a lot that was actually getting accomplished. And so I suggested to my friend that he pick up the phone and call one of the parties involved in the dialogue and the discussion. And he resisted that initially, thinking that email might be more efficient. And I kind of hung in there and suggested that I really thought it was important to pick up the phone and talk, because there's no substitute for the power of the human voice and the ability to dialogue, to have give and take, which you really can't have on email, and you can't have in a text, and you can't have in Facebook Messenger. I mean, you can have a little bit of it, but body language and voice tone, as well as the ability to ask follow-up questions to get clarification, I think are really essential to communication. And I think what happened here was, after some resistance, he did in fact call that person. We were all involved in roughly a 20 or 30-minute conversation that led to one more telephone conversation and the resolution of what was frankly just a little bit of miscommunication. Somebody was operating out of one perspective on a given topic and not didn't have the benefit of the breadth of knowledge that another party in the conversation had. So the issues that had kind of hovered over the top of this negotiation for a couple of weeks were actually resolved fairly quickly. And if everything goes according to plan, in the next couple of days, that'll be totally resolved with all the information flow back and forth with one another and all the appropriate parties, so that the negotiation can come to a conclusion where everybody's happy. And I think it's important to point out in this that nobody's intentions here in this particular example were wrong. No one was acting in bad faith. Although my mother often taught me, and so shout out to you, Mom, that the road to, well, you know where, hell, the bad place, was often paved with good intentions. And so in this case, I think there are a couple lessons to be learned. Number one is your intentions don't matter as much as your actions do. Your actions in a given situation, and I think it was Einstein who said that one definition of insanity is to continue to do the same things over and over again and expect a different result, which is really what was happening in this email trap. So your intentions don't matter as much as your actions do. And I think taking action, taking a different course of action in a situation where communication is foundering or where resolution to a problem is foundering is essential. Like I said, there's no substitute for the human voice. And when people get together to try and solve a problem or to accomplish a common goal, and they can actually see one another, hear one another, if you can't be physically present, at least be on the telephone where people can work through issues promptly and quickly. And so oftentimes email feels like a strategy for effective communication or effective business life or personal life. And I think it's really only good and useful really for a data dump a lot of times, or when you want to report something and make sure that everyone knows you've reported it, or that someone is trying to kind of put a stake in the ground about some factual data. And so picking up the phone and talking to somebody directly, there's an unlimited amount of information that can be accomplished, or a lot of things that can be accomplished in a very short period of time. Not the least of which is lowering everybody's level of frustration. And I've often wondered, as I've reflected on this the last couple of days, how much less frustration multiple parties in this conversation might have had if they had picked up the phone, or someone had picked up the phone a week or so earlier, or maybe 2 weeks earlier, and it could have been brought to a conclusion more quickly. So those are the 2 or 3 or 4 lessons that I learned from this issue about communication. Intentions don't matter. Taking action is important. The power of the human voice, and I forgot what the 4th one was, but this is not essential that you can listen to the video again or not. And so whatever you do, as you move forward, I think these things are useful in your personal life, in your professional life, in your community life, and can perhaps lower your level of frustration and actually accelerate your productivity in resolving conflict or misunderstanding when people have the courage and the willingness to come together to accomplish something that's important to everybody. So with that said, I hope this has been useful. It's a little different, a little off the beaten path for me, but hopefully will be something that you find helpful. And if it is, please let me know. And if it's not, just let me know that too, as I always say. And I will say that you'll see a little different behind me here today, trying a little different angle. Probably going to be moving that around a little bit more so that you get a little better look at, I don't know, the yellowish tan walls behind me or whatever, and the artwork over here. So have a great night, a great week. Talk to you soon. I'm Jim Owens.